The small town of Maplewood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Life moved at a slow pace, and people liked it that way. It was the kind of community where you could leave your door unlocked and trust that no harm would come to you or your family. But all of that changed one autumn evening when 17-year-old Emily Carter vanished without a trace. Emily was a bright, cheerful girl who had a knack for capturing life through her camera lens. She loved taking pictures of sunsets, animals, and even the little details most people overlooked, like cracks in the sidewalk or raindrops on leaves. Her smile lit up every room she entered, and her laugh was infectious. Everyone in town adored her, especially her father, David Carter. A widower who had raised Emily on his own after losing his wife to illness years earlier, David lived for his daughter. She was his entire world. On the night she disappeared, Emily had planned a special date with Jake, her high school boyfriend. They were supposed to watch the sunset by the lake, a favorite spot for couples in Maplewood, and then grab dinner at their go-to diner. Emily had been excited about the evening, chatting about it with her friends during lunch earlier that day. She even texted David a quick "love you, Dad" before heading out. That was the last time anyone heard from her. Jake told investigators that he waited for Emily by the lake, but got impatient when she didn't show up. He claimed he called her phone multiple times, but it went straight to voicemail. Eventually, he decided to head home, assuming she'd changed her mind about the date. When Emily didn't return home that night, David grew worried. He tried calling her phone too, but there was no answer. By morning, panic set in. A search party was quickly organized. Friends, neighbors, and volunteers scoured the area around the lake, the woods, and nearby streets. Emily's camera was discovered abandoned near the water's edge, its strap tangled, in some bushes. The battery was dead and the memory card was missing. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints, nothing to indicate what might have happened. It was as if Emily had simply evaporated into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and the police followed every possible lead. They questioned Jake extensively, but he stuck to his story. They checked security footage from local businesses, interviewed Emily's friends, and even brought in cadaver dogs to search the surrounding areas. Still, nothing concrete emerged. The case grew cold, leaving David and the rest of Maplewood heartbroken and baffled. For David, the loss was unbearable. Every corner of his house reminded him of Emily. The photos on the walls, her favorite blanket draped over the couch, the sound of her laughter echoing in his memories. He replayed the events of that night over and over in his mind, wondering if he could have done something differently. Should he have asked more questions about her plans? Should he have insisted on driving her to the lake himself? Guilt gnawed at him day and night, making it impossible to move forward. As the months passed, life in Maplewood slowly returned to normal for everyone except David. For him, time seemed to stand still. The pain of not knowing what happened to his daughter weighed heavily on his shoulders. Little did he know, 5 years later, a single moment in front of the television would reignite his hope and change everything. In the years following Emily's disappearance, David Carter became a shadow of the man he once was. The vibrant energy that used to fill his home had been replaced by an overwhelming silence. His days blurred together, each one more monotonous than the last. He stopped fixing cars, a job he had loved for decades, and let his garage collect dust. Friends and neighbors tried to check in on him, bringing over casseroles or offering words of encouragement, but David rarely opened the door. He couldn't bear to face them, knowing their pitying looks would only deepen his pain. The house that once buzzed with Emily's laughter now felt like a museum, frozen in time. Her bedroom remained untouched, exactly as she'd left it the morning of her date. Her favorite books were stacked neatly on the desk, her clothes hung in the closet, and her camera bag sat beside the bed. David often found himself standing in the doorway, staring at the room as if willing her to walk through it. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit on her bed, clutching her pillow and inhaling the faint scent of her shampoo, hoping it might bring her closer. David's grief wasn't just emotional. It seeped into every aspect of his life. He stopped shaving, his beard growing wild and unkempt. Meals became sporadic. Sometimes he'd forget to eat altogether. Other times he'd binge on junk food while mindlessly flipping through TV channels. Sleep eluded him most nights. And when he did manage to drift off, his dreams were haunted by images of Emily calling out for help. He'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, convinced he'd missed something vital that could have saved her. To cope, or perhaps to punish himself, David threw himself into researching missing persons cases. He spent hours online reading about similar disappearances and poring over forums where families shared their stories. He plastered posters with Emily's photo all over town, even though years had passed since she went missing. He hired private investigators, draining his savings in the process, but none of them uncovered anything new. Each dead end felt like another nail in his coffin of despair. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors, speculating about what might have happened to Emily. Some believed she ran away, unable to handle the pressures of high school or family life. Others thought she fell victim to foul play, pointing fingers at Jake, who had quietly moved away not long after the investigation fizzled out. But without evidence, these theories remained nothing more than rumors. For David, the uncertainty was unbearable. Not knowing whether his daughter was alive or dead tormented him far worse than any definitive answer ever could. On the 5th anniversary of Emily's disappearance, David visited the lake where she was last seen. It had become a somber ritual for him, a way to mark the passage of time and keep her memory alive. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, he sat on the same bench they used to share. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I should have protected you." As darkness fell, David trudged back home feeling heavier than ever. He collapsed onto the couch, exhausted yet unable to sleep. Flipping through TV channels aimlessly, he stumbled upon a travel documentary about remote villages in South America. Just as he was about to change the channel, something, or rather, someone, on the screen caught his eye. A young woman with strikingly familiar features appeared briefly, smiling as she worked alongside locals. David froze, his breath catching in his throat. Could it really be her? Or was this just another cruel trick of his desperate mind? For the first time in years, a flicker of hope stirred within him. Even if it turned out to be nothing, he knew he couldn't ignore it. This moment, fleeting as it was, reignited a spark inside David, a determination to find answers, no matter how long it took or how far he had to go. While David Carter remained trapped in the suffocating grip of grief, life in Maplewood continued to move forward for everyone else. The town healed in its own way, slowly stitching itself back together after the shock of Emily's disappearance. People returned to their routines, going to work, attending school plays, hosting barbecues on weekends. Conversations about Emily became less frequent, though her name still lingered in quiet whispers during late-night gatherings or chance encounters at the grocery store. For many, she was a painful reminder of how fragile life could be. Jake, Emily's ex-boyfriend, had left town shortly after the investigation lost steam. At first, people speculated that his departure was suspicious, that maybe he knew more than he let on. Some even accused him outright, pointing fingers and spreading rumors. But without evidence tying him to her disappearance, Jake faded into obscurity, leaving behind only unanswered questions. His absence created a void in the case, one that made it easier for people to shift their focus elsewhere. Over time, they convinced themselves that whatever happened to Emily was beyond solving. Emily's friends, meanwhile, tried to honor her memory by living their lives fully. They graduated high school, went off to college, started careers, and built families of their own. Yet no matter how much they achieved, there was always an unspoken ache, a sense that something was missing. On quiet nights, they would scroll through old photos of Emily, remembering her laugh, her kindness, and the way she lit up every room she entered. Sometimes they wondered if they could have done more to help find her. Guilt and regret clung to them like shadows even as they moved on. For David, however, moving on wasn't an option. Every milestone others celebrated felt like salt in his wounds. Birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries came and went, but they were hollow without Emily. He couldn't bring himself to decorate for Christmas or light candles on Thanksgiving, because those traditions felt meaningless without her by his side. Even simple pleasures like watching a sunset or hearing a favorite song carried a bittersweet sting. Everything reminded him of her: the curve of a smile, the flash of a camera lens, the rustle of leaves in the wind. Despite his isolation, David occasionally found himself drawn back into conversations about Emily. Strangers walking their dogs near the lake would stop him to ask if he was the father of that girl who went missing. Friends from church or former co-workers would pull him aside at community events, offering condolences or sharing updates about similar cases they'd heard about on the news. These moments were both comforting and excruciating. While part of him appreciated that people hadn't forgotten Emily, another part resented being defined solely by her loss. Still, there were rare occasions when David allowed himself to dream. In those fleeting moments between wakefulness and sleep, he imagined scenarios where Emily walked through the door, explaining that she'd been safe all along. Maybe she'd suffered amnesia and just now remembered who she was. Or perhaps she'd been held captive somewhere, finally managing to escape. These dreams were vivid and real, so much so that waking up felt like losing her all over again. Each morning, he'd lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, wishing he could return to the dream world where she still existed. One evening, while sitting alone in his dimly lit living room, David flipped through channels on the TV. Most nights, this was mindless background noise, a way to drown out the silence that echoed through the house. But then something unusual caught his attention: a travel documentary showcasing remote villages in South America. As the camera panned across a group of locals weaving colorful textiles, a young woman appeared on screen. She looked older than Emily would have been, but eerily familiar. Her smile, the shape of her eyes, the way she tilted her head, it was uncanny. David's heart raced as he rewound the footage multiple times, scrutinizing every detail. Was it possible? Could this stranger halfway across the world somehow be connected to his daughter? Rationality told him it was probably nothing, a coincidence born of desperation. But deep down, a small voice whispered that he couldn't ignore it. This was the first glimmer of hope he'd felt in years, and no matter how faint, it was enough to reignite his determination. With trembling hands, David jotted down the details of the program, the name of the village, the humanitarian organization mentioned in the segment, and the woman's alias, Maria Solano. For the first time in 5 long years, he felt a spark of purpose. Whether this lead amounted to anything or not, he owed it to Emily and to himself to follow it wherever it might take him. The moment David Carter saw the young woman on the travel documentary, his world shifted. It wasn't just her resemblance to Emily that caught his attention. It was something deeper, almost instinctual. The way she smiled, the curve of her jawline, the tilt of her head as she worked alongside locals weaving textiles, it all felt hauntingly familiar. For 5 years he had clung to scraps of hope, chasing shadows and dead ends. But this felt different. Real. That night, David couldn't sleep. He replayed the scene over and over in his mind, trying to piece together whether it was wishful thinking or a genuine clue. By morning, his resolve was set. If there was even the slightest chance this woman could be connected to Emily, he had to act. Sitting at his cluttered kitchen table, he scribbled down every detail he could remember from the program. The name of the village in Peru, the humanitarian organization mentioned during the segment, and the alias, Maria Solano. His hands trembled. As he wrote, adrenaline coursing through him like electricity. Reaching out to the filmmakers behind the documentary proved harder than David expected. They were based in Europe, and their contact information was buried deep within the credits. After days of persistent emails and phone calls, he finally got a response. A producer named Clara agreed to speak with him, though she sounded skeptical at first. Over a crackly international call, David explained who he was and why he believed the woman on screen might be his missing daughter. To his relief, Clara listened intently and promised to help. Clara confirmed that the woman's name was indeed Maria Solano, and that she lived in a remote mountain village in Peru. According to the crew, Maria had been working with the aid organization for several years, helping impoverished communities access clean water and education. She rarely spoke about her past, claiming she didn't remember much before arriving in the village. When David asked if they ever questioned her background, Clara admitted they hadn't pressed too hard. She seemed harmless, kind, and deeply committed to her work. Armed with this new information, David faced a decision that would change everything. Traveling to South America wasn't easy, not financially, emotionally, or physically. His savings were nearly depleted from years of private investigators and fruitless searches. His health had suffered from stress and neglect, leaving him weaker than he cared to admit. And yet, none of that mattered. This was Emily, or at least it could be. He owed it to her to find out. Booking the flight felt surreal, like stepping into a dream. As he packed his suitcase, filling it with photos of Emily, letters he'd written to her over the years, and copies of police reports, David allowed himself a flicker of hope. What if this was it? What if after all these years, he was finally going to see her again? The thought made his chest tighten, but it also gave him strength. For the first time since her disappearance, he felt purpose driving him forward. The journey itself was grueling. Long flights, layovers in unfamiliar airports, and a bumpy bus ride up winding mountain roads tested his endurance. But David barely noticed. His mind was consumed by questions. How would Maria react when she saw him? Would she recognize him? Or worse, what if she denied any connection to Emily altogether? Each scenario played out in his head like scenes from a movie, some hopeful, others devastating. When David finally arrived in the village, exhaustion tugged at his body, but his spirit burned bright. Nestled high in the Andes, the village was breathtakingly beautiful, surrounded by lush green peaks and wisps of clouds drifting lazily across the sky. Locals greeted him warmly, curious about the stranger who had traveled so far to visit them. Through broken Spanish and gestures, David explained his mission, showing them pictures of Emily as a child. Their expressions softened, and they pointed him toward a small hut where Maria often stayed. Standing outside the hut, David hesitated. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing like a drum roll. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door. When it opened, he came face to face with the woman from the documentary. Her eyes widened in surprise, meeting his gaze with a mixture of curiosity and caution. For a moment, neither spoke. Then in halting English, she said, "Who are you?" David swallowed hard, clutching the photo album tightly in his hands. "My name is David," he replied, his voice trembling. "And I think you might be my daughter." The air was thick with tension as David stood there gripping the photo album like a lifeline. Maria, her name still unfamiliar on his tongue, looked at him with wide, cautious eyes. She didn't say anything for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Was she shocked? Confused? Scared? David couldn't tell. All he could do was wait, his heart hammering in his chest, hoping against hope that this wasn't another dead end. Finally, Maria stepped aside and gestured for him to come in. Her hut was simple but cozy, filled with handmade textiles and the faint scent of herbs drying by the window. She offered him a seat on a wooden stool, then sat across from him, her posture stiff and guarded. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable, until David finally broke it. "I'm sorry if this is strange," he began, his voice shaky but earnest. "But I need you to look at these." He opened the photo album and turned it toward her, revealing pictures of Emily as a child, laughing at birthday parties, posing with her camera, hugging David tightly. "This is my daughter, Emily. She disappeared 5 years ago, and when I saw you on TV, you looked so much like her." Maria stared at the photos, her brow furrowing slightly. She flipped through a few pages, her fingers brushing lightly over the images. Then she looked up at David, her dark eyes searching his face. "You think I'm her?" she asked softly, her English hesitant but clear. David nodded, tears welling. up in his eyes. I don't know for sure, but there's something about you. Your smile, the way you hold yourself. It's like seeing a ghost of my daughter. Please, just tell me, do you remember anything about your past? Anything at all? Maria hesitated, looking down at her hands. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost fragile. I don't remember much. I woke up in a hospital in Lima years ago. They told me I'd been found unconscious near the city, with no ID or belongings. My head hurt and everything felt blank, like someone had erased part of me. The doctors gave me papers with the name Maria Solano on them, so I started using it. I came here because I wanted to help people, to feel useful. But my past... She shook her head slowly. It's gone. David listened intently, his mind racing. Could it really be possible? Had Emily somehow survived whatever happened to her and ended up in Peru, her memory wiped clean? Or was this just a tragic coincidence, a woman who bore an uncanny resemblance to his daughter? Desperate for answers, David pulled out more recent photos of Emily as a teenager. Look at these, he urged gently. Does any of this feel familiar? Do you recognize yourself? Maria studied the pictures carefully, her expression softening as she traced the lines of Emily's face with her fingertips. There was a flicker of emotion in her eyes, something between recognition and confusion. Maybe, she whispered, after a long pause. There's something, I don't know how to explain it, but some of these images, they make my chest ache, like they're tied to something deep inside me. David felt a surge of hope, but he forced himself to stay calm. If you're willing, we can try to figure this out together. We can take a DNA test. It'll prove once and for all if you're Emily. He watched her closely, waiting for her reaction. Maria frowned, clearly conflicted. What if it's true? She asked quietly. What happens then? Everything I've built here. My life. It's not perfect, but it's mine. If I'm your daughter, does that mean I have to leave all of this behind? David reached out, placing a gentle hand on hers. No one's asking you to give up who you are now, he said firmly. But if you're Emily, don't you want to know? Don't you deserve to understand where you came from? Tears welled up in Maria's eyes, and she nodded slowly. Okay, she murmured. Let's find out. Over the next few days, David worked tirelessly to arrange a DNA test. With the help of local officials and the humanitarian organization, samples were collected and sent off to a lab in Lima. While they waited for the results, David spent hours talking with Maria, sharing stories about Emily's childhood, the mischief she got into, the dreams she chased, the love she shared with everyone around her. Slowly, tentatively, Maria began opening up too, recounting fragments of memories that surfaced when she least expected them. Flashes of a lake, the sound of a camera shutter clicking, the warmth of someone's embrace. Each story brought them closer, bridging the gap between the man who had lost his daughter and the woman who might be her. Yet beneath the growing bond, uncertainty lingered. What would happen if the test confirmed what David hoped? And what if it didn't? The wait for the DNA test results was agonizing. Every day felt like an eternity, each hour stretching longer than the last. David and Maria tried to keep themselves occupied, but the looming question hung over them like a storm cloud. Was she Emily, or was this just another cruel twist of fate? During those days, they continued to talk, long, heartfelt, conversations that peeled back layers of both their lives. David shared more about Emily's childhood, her love for sunsets, her obsession with photography, the way she used to sneak cookies from the jar when she thought no one was looking. He told her about the nights he'd spent staring at her empty bed, wondering if she was safe, cold, or scared. Each story painted a vivid picture of the girl Maria might have been, and with every detail she seemed to grow quieter, more reflective. For her part, Maria began sharing snippets of her fragmented memories. She described fleeting images that came to her in dreams, a shadowy figure standing by water, The hum of crickets on a summer night, the taste of something sweet melting on her tongue. Sometimes, she admitted softly, I feel like I'm living two lives at once. One here, with these people who've become my family, and another somewhere far away, with someone I can't quite remember. David listened intently, his heart breaking and swelling all at once. Whether or not the test confirmed she was Emily, it was clear that Maria carried pieces of his daughter within her. The resemblance wasn't just physical. It was in the way she laughed, the kindness in her eyes, the quiet strength she showed even when she was unsure of herself. Finally, after what felt like forever, the results arrived. David and Maria stood, side by side as a local official read the report aloud. The words hit them like a tidal wave. The DNA samples confirm a biological relationship. Maria Solano is the missing person known as Emily Carter. For a moment, neither of them moved. The room seemed to spin, the weight of the truth settling over them. Then Maria, Emily, broke down in tears, collapsing into David's arms. He held her tightly, sobbing uncontrollably as years of grief and longing poured out of him. It was real. She was alive. His daughter had come back to him. But as the initial shock wore off, reality set in. Emily's return raised more questions than answers. How had she ended up in Peru? Why couldn't she remember her past? And most importantly, who or what had taken her away from Maplewood 5 years ago? Back in the United States, news of Emily's reappearance spread quickly. The small town buzzed with excitement and disbelief. Friends, neighbors, and former classmates reached out, eager to reconnect with the girl they thought they'd lost forever. Jake, however, reacted differently. When investigators tracked him down in Chicago, where he'd been living under a false name, he grew visibly nervous. Confronted with questions about Emily's disappearance, cracks began to form in his carefully constructed alibi. Under pressure, Jake finally confessed, but only partially. He admitted to arguing with Emily by the lake that night, claiming she wanted to break up with him because she felt suffocated by their relationship. Enraged and desperate, he called someone for help, a man he vaguely knew who dealt with problems for a price. According to Jake, this man drugged Emily and drove off with her while Jake stood frozen, too afraid to intervene. What happened next, he swore, he didn't know. Authorities launched a new investigation, linking Emily's case to a human trafficking ring operating near the lake. Evidence suggested she may have been abducted and transported across state lines before escaping into the wilderness. That escape likely led to her collapse near Lima, where locals found her unconscious and brought her to the hospital. As the pieces fell into place, David and Emily faced the daunting task of rebuilding their bond. For Emily, rediscovering her identity was both a blessing and a challenge. She struggled to reconcile the life she'd built in Peru with the one waiting for her in Maplewood. But through it all, she clung to one undeniable truth. She was no longer alone. Her father was by her side, determined to make up for every moment they'd lost, and to ensure she never disappeared again. With Emily's identity confirmed and Jake's partial confession shedding some light on her disappearance, the focus shifted to unraveling the full truth. David knew that finding answers wouldn't just bring closure, it was also about justice. For 5 years he had lived with the agony of not knowing what happened to his daughter. Now, armed with new evidence and determination, he refused to let the past remain buried. The authorities reopened Emily's case, digging deeper into the human trafficking ring Jake claimed was involved. Investigators discovered that the group operated discreetly, preying on vulnerable individuals in small towns like Maplewood. They would abduct their victims, erase their identities through drugs or coercion, and transport them across borders to be sold into forced labor or worse. Emily's escape suggested she might have been one of the few who managed to break free, but how she ended up in Peru remained a mystery. To help piece together her fragmented memories, Emily agreed to undergo hypnosis sessions with a forensic psychologist. At first, she hesitated, fearing what hidden truths might surface, but David reassured her, promising to stand by her side no matter what they uncovered. During the sessions, buried fragments of her memory began to resurface. Blurry images of a van speeding through dark roads, the sound of muffled voices arguing, and the sensation of cold metal pressing against her wrists. One particularly vivid recollection brought tears streaming down her face. Waking up disoriented in dense woods, her head throbbing, her body weak. She remembered stumbling aimlessly until exhaustion overtook her, collapsing near a dirt path where strangers eventually found her. These memories painted a harrowing picture of what Emily endured, but also provided crucial details for the investigation. Using her descriptions, authorities identified a suspicious vehicle seen near the lake around the time of her disappearance. Surveillance footage from nearby gas stations revealed grainy images of the same van traveling out of state shortly after Emily vanished. The trail led investigators to a network of safe houses used by the trafficking ring, several of which were raided in coordinated operations. Meanwhile, Jake's role in the ordeal came under intense scrutiny. While he maintained that he hadn't intended for Emily to be harmed, his actions, or lack thereof, spoke volumes. By calling someone he knew engaged in illegal activities, he had effectively handed her over to predators. Though he cooperated with the investigation, providing names and locations tied to the trafficking ring, his guilt weighed heavily on him. Public outrage grew as details of his involvement emerged, and he was arrested on charges of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. As the case unfolded, David worked tirelessly alongside law enforcement, ensuring Emily's voice was heard every step of the way. He attended press conferences, spoke to reporters, and advocated for stricter measures to combat human trafficking. "No parent should have to endure what I went through," he told a packed room of journalists. "Emily is alive, but so many others aren't as lucky. We need to do better, for them, and for everyone still missing." For Emily, the journey toward healing was far from easy. Rediscovering her old life meant confronting painful emotions she'd buried for years. Some days she felt overwhelmed by the weight of her dual existence, as Maria, the woman who helped villagers in Peru, and as Emily, the girl who once dreamed of becoming a photographer. Yet, with David's unwavering support, she began to embrace both parts of herself. Together they visited familiar places from her childhood, the lake where she loved watching sunsets, the diner where she and Jake used to eat milkshakes, the park where she snapped countless photos. Each trip stirred bittersweet memories but also reminded her of the joy she once felt. Slowly, Emily started rebuilding connections with friends and family. Her high school best friend, Sarah, organized a welcome home gathering, filling the house with laughter and love. Neighbors stopped by to share stories of how much they missed her, and even teachers who remembered her fondly sent letters of encouragement. It wasn't always easy. Some moments left her feeling like an outsider in her own life. But each interaction brought her closer to reclaiming the pieces of herself she thought were lost forever. Through it all, David never left her side. Whether it was helping her sort through old photo albums or simply sitting quietly when words failed, he made sure she knew she was loved. Their bond, tested by unimaginable pain, had grown stronger than ever. And though scars remained, they faced the future together, ready to write a new chapter, one filled with hope, healing, and second chances. The final chapter of Emily's story was one of redemption, not just for her and David, but for everyone whose lives had been touched by her disappearance. As the dust settled on the investigation, the truth about what happened that night by the lake came into sharper focus. Jake's cooperation helped authorities dismantle a significant portion of the trafficking ring, leading to multiple arrests and rescues of other victims who had been missing for years. While justice couldn't undo the pain they endured, it offered a sense of closure and a promise that such crimes would no longer go unnoticed. For David, seeing Emily alive and safe brought a peace he thought he'd lost forever. The years of guilt and grief slowly began to lift, replaced by gratitude for every moment they now shared. He marveled at how resilient she was, watching as she navigated the delicate balance between her past and present selves. Though there were days when sadness crept in, for the years stolen from them, for the innocence shattered. David reminded himself that Emily was here, whole and breathing, and that was enough. Emily, too, found strength she didn't know she possessed. Rediscovering her identity wasn't easy. Some memories still lingered just out of reach, while others brought sharp pangs of sorrow. But she refused to let those shadows define her. Instead, she channeled her experiences into something meaningful. Inspired by the kindness shown to her during her time in Peru, she decided to pursue a career in social work, helping vulnerable individuals rebuild their lives after trauma. "I've been given a second chance," she told David one evening as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. "I want to help others find theirs." Their bond deepened with each passing day. David learned to see Emily not just as his little girl, but as the remarkable woman she had become. A blend of the cheerful teenager he once knew and the compassionate stranger who had lived among the mountains of Peru. Together they created new traditions: weekly hikes to the lake, cooking meals using recipes Emily remembered from her childhood, and even starting a small photography project to document the beauty of Maplewood. Each click of the camera shutter felt like reclaiming a piece of the life she loved. The town rallied around them, celebrating Emily's return as a miracle. Friends threw parties, neighbors dropped off homemade pies, and local businesses hung signs welcoming her home. Even strangers approached her in the grocery store or at the park, sharing stories of how her disappearance had impacted them. At first, Emily found the attention overwhelming, but over time, she realized it came from a place of love. Maplewood hadn't forgotten her. They had kept her memory alive, holding on to hope even when the odds seemed impossible. As for Jake, his arrest marked the end of a dark chapter. His trial drew national attention, sparking conversations about accountability and the dangers of reckless decisions. Though he expressed remorse, many struggled to forgive him for his role in Emily's ordeal. For David, forgiveness wasn't something he could offer easily, but he chose to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on anger. "Hate won't bring Emily back," he said simply. "She's here now, and that's all that matters." In the months that followed, Emily and David took steps toward rebuilding their future. They visited Peru together, meeting the villagers who had cared for Maria during her years away. It was an emotional trip, filled with tears and laughter, as Emily thanked the people who had unknowingly played a part in saving her life. Back home, they planted a tree in their backyard, a symbol of growth, resilience, and renewal. Though scars remained, they served as reminders of how far they'd come. Emily no longer feared the unknown. Instead, she embraced it, knowing she had the strength to face whatever lay ahead. And David, once consumed by despair, found joy in the simplest moments, sharing coffee with his daughter, hearing her laugh echo through the house, and watching her chase dreams she never thought possible. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, a testament to the power of hope, love, and second chances. As they stood side by side under the golden glow of another sunset, David wrapped an arm around Emily's shoulders. "We're going to be okay," he whispered. She smiled, leaning into him, and nodded. For the first time in years, they truly believed it.